Sarah walked into the weekly team meeting with a brilliant idea she'd been developing for weeks. She was certain it would solve their department's biggest challenge. When she finally found a moment to speak, she laid out her plan with careful precision. But something strange happened. Her manager, Michael, nodded politely, then slightly shifted the topic. "That's interesting, but what about—" Suddenly, the entire conversation had moved in a different direction. By the meeting's end, Sarah's idea was forgotten, and Michael's alternative approach became the team's new focus. Sarah left confused and frustrated. What just happened? She had solid ideas. She'd presented them clearly, yet somehow, she'd lost control of the conversation without even realizing there was a battle taking place. This scene plays out every day in boardrooms, coffee shops, dinner tables, and Zoom calls around the world. Most people believe conversations are simple exchanges of information. You speak, I speak, we share ideas. But that's only what's happening on the surface. Beneath every conversation flows an invisible current of power. Someone is always steering the ship. Often without others even noticing, there's a captain at the helm. It's the result of someone else mastering the hidden rules of conversational power. The good news? They can be learned. And once you understand them, you'll never experience conversations the same way again. Research shows that in most group conversations, roughly 20% of the people do 80% of the talking. But it's not always the loudest or most extroverted who control the flow. Often, it's those who understand the subtle art of conversational power. Take Emma, a soft-spoken project manager known for her ability to get buy-in from even the most difficult stakeholders. In meetings, she speaks less than most of her colleagues, yet her ideas consistently gain traction. How does she do it? "I never try to overpower others in conversation," she explains. "Instead, I listen for the right moment, then frame my ideas in ways that connect to what matters most to them." Emma understands something crucial. The volume of your voice matters far less than the timing of your words and how you frame your ideas. Once you recognize the invisible game being played in every conversation, you're ready to learn your first and perhaps most counterintuitive power move, one that requires you to do absolutely nothing. Picture this scene. Detective Rodriguez sits across from a suspect in a bare interrogation room. She asks a pointed question about the suspect's whereabouts on the night of the incident. The suspect answers with a rehearsed response. Instead of firing another question, Rodriguez does something unexpected. She says nothing. She simply maintains eye contact and waits. The silence stretches for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15. The suspect shifts uncomfortably, then begins to elaborate, adding details not mentioned before, nervously filling the vacuum created by the detective's silence. In the moment, Rodriguez has gained the upper hand. This technique isn't just for detectives. It works in negotiations, business meetings, personal relationships, anywhere human beings communicate. Consider James, a seasoned sales director negotiating a major contract. When the client names their initial offer, James doesn't immediately counter. Instead, he pauses, lets the silence hang in the air. The client, uncomfortable with the void, starts talking again, offering concessions before James has said a word. "Silence makes people uncomfortable," James explains. "And uncomfortable people reveal things." Most of us have an almost physical aversion to silence in conversation. We rush to fill gaps with words, any words, often revealing more than we intended or making concessions we hadn't planned. This is why silence is such a powerful tool in the hands of those who can wield it comfortably. Emily, a marriage therapist with 20 years of experience, uses strategic silence to transform couples' communication patterns. "When I ask a challenging question and then stay silent, something magical happens," she says. "People move past their practiced talking points and get to what's really bothering them. The silence creates space for truth to emerge." But silence isn't just about getting others to reveal more. It's also about controlling the rhythm of the conversation. Most people make a critical mistake in conversation. They react instantly to whatever is said to them. Someone makes a point, they immediately respond. Someone asks a question, they rush to answer. Someone challenges them, they quickly defend themselves. This reactive pattern surrenders control. Consider how differently these scenarios play out. Scenario 1. Colleague, "Your proposal won't work." You, reactive, "Yes, it will. Let me explain why." Scenario 2. Colleague, "Your proposal won't work." You, with a brief pause and a calm expression. What specific aspect concerns you most? In the first scenario, you're playing defense on your colleague's court. In the second, you've reclaimed control of the conversation with a simple pause and a redirecting question. This is the power of breaking the reactive cycle. When you pause before responding, You gain a critical moment to choose your path rather than simply reacting to the path someone else has set for you. Strategic silence gives you control over when you speak. But now, let's explore what might be the most powerful aspect of conversational mastery, controlling how the entire discussion is understood. Let me tell you about two politicians discussing the same tax policy. Politician A says, "This tax increase will cost hardworking families $2,000 per year." Politician B says, "This public investment ensures every child has access to quality education." They're discussing identical legislation, but notice how differently they've framed it. One has framed it as a costly burden, the other as an essential investment. And here's the key. Whichever framing dominates the conversation will likely determine public opinion. This illustrates perhaps the most powerful principle in conversational dynamics. Whoever controls the frame controls the conversation. Think of a frame as the lens through which a conversation is viewed. It establishes what the conversation is really about. And once a frame is accepted, all discussion tends to happen within its boundaries. Let's see this play out in everyday life. Maria and her husband David are discussing whether to move to a new city for Maria's job opportunity. David: "Moving would uproot our whole family. The kids would have to change schools. We'd lose our community, and we'd have to sell the house we've put so much work into." David has framed the conversation around loss and disruption. If Maria accepts this frame and starts defending the move within these parameters, she's already at a disadvantage. But watch what happens when Maria reframes. Maria: "This move represents our family's chance to grow in new ways. The children would experience a top-rated school system. We'd be closer to your parents, and we could finally afford the larger home we've been dreaming about." Maria hasn't directly countered David's concerns. Instead, she's established an entirely new frame, one of opportunity and growth rather than loss and disruption. The conversation will now unfold very differently because the frame has shifted. Consider these everyday examples. 1. Your boss questions why a project is behind schedule. Weak approach. Accept the failure frame and offer excuses. Strong approach. This project has revealed some critical insights that will actually save us time and resources in the long run. 2. A friend complains you're always late. Weak approach. Defend your punctuality record. Strong approach. I prioritize being fully present over being early but distracted. 3. Someone criticizes an idea as too expensive. Weak approach. Try to justify the cost. Strong approach. Let's look at the return on investment rather than just the initial expenditure. In each case, you're not arguing within their frame. You're establishing a new one altogether. The most powerful frames are often introduced through questions rather than statements. Questions force the listener to think within the parameters you've established. Compare these approaches. Your colleague says, "We don't have the budget for this initiative." Response 1. Yes, we do, if we reallocate from other areas. Statement that will likely trigger resistance. Response 2. How might we prioritize our resources to accommodate the highest impact initiatives? Question that establishes a new frame of prioritization rather than limitation. The question doesn't just ask for information. It creates a new lens through which to view the entire discussion. This is why skilled communicators often lead with questions. Questions don't just gather information. They shape the mental pathways along which the conversation will travel. With framing in your toolkit, you're well on your way to conversational mastery. But there's a fundamental mindset shift that takes these skills from merely effective to truly transformative. The difference between forcing versus guiding illustrates the most sophisticated level of conversational mastery. The shift from competitor to conductor. Most people approach conversations as competitions to be won. They aim to have the best arguments, the quickest responses, or the final word. This competitive mindset creates a fundamental paradox. The harder you fight for conversational control, the more it slips from your grasp. James, a veteran corporate mediator, explains it this way. When you try to dominate a conversation, you create resistance. When you aim to conduct it, you create harmony, even among opposing viewpoints. This conducting approach requires 3 essential skills: selective engagement, redirection, and rhythmic control. 1. Selective engagement. Choosing your battles. Imagine you're at a family dinner when your uncle makes a provocative political statement, clearly intended to draw you into an argument. Everyone turns to you, expecting the usual heated debate. But what if, instead of taking the bait, you simply smile slightly and ask him to pass the potatoes? In that moment, you've demonstrated more power than any argument could have. You've shown that you decide which conversational threads deserve your energy, not him. Elena, a senior diplomat, credits this technique with saving countless negotiations. When someone makes an inflammatory remark, everyone watches for your reaction, she explains. If you engage, you validate their attempt to derail the conversation. If you acknowledge without engaging, you maintain control. This selective engagement isn't about ignoring people. It's about choosing which aspects of their communication merit your full attention. It's the conversational equivalent of deciding which battles are worth fighting. 2. Redirection. The art of conversational Aikido. When a conversation moves in an unproductive direction, most people make a critical error. They push back directly, creating friction and resistance. True masters practice something more akin to conversational Aikido, using the momentum of the discussion to guide it in a better direction rather than opposing it head-on. Consider how Marcus, a veteran crisis counselor, handles hostile situations. When someone comes at me with anger, I never meet resistance with resistance, he explains. Instead, I briefly acknowledge their feeling, then redirect toward solutions. It's like steering a river rather than building a dam. This technique works because it aligns with rather than opposes the natural flow of conversation. By acknowledging the current direction before redirecting, you avoid triggering the defensiveness that direct opposition would create. For example, your colleague says, "We've tried this approach before and it failed miserably." Instead of arguing that this time is different, you might say, "You're right to be cautious based on past experiences. What specific elements would need to change for this approach to succeed this time?" You've acknowledged their concern while subtly shifting from a closed frame, "It failed before, so it will fail again," to an open one, "What would make it work?" 3rd, rhythmic control. Setting the conversational tempo. The final element of conversational leadership is controlling its rhythm and pace. Think about how differently you respond to someone speaking rapidly, urgently, and loudly, versus someone speaking deliberately, thoughtfully, and calmly. The content might be identical, but the delivery dramatically affects how you receive it. Judge Teresa Rodriguez is known for her ability to maintain complete control of her courtroom without raising her voice. When attorneys become agitated and speak more quickly, I deliberately slow my pace, she explains. I lower my voice slightly rather than raising it. This creates a pattern interrupt that recalibrates the entire room. This technique works in any setting. When others become emotionally charged and speak more rapidly, deliberately slowing your pace creates a calming effect that often leads them to match your tempo rather than you matching theirs. Similarly, when pressed for an immediate answer, the simple act of pausing thoughtfully signals that you determine the conversational timeline, not external pressure. Mastering this rhythm doesn't mean always speaking slowly. It means consciously choosing your pace rather than allowing it to be dictated by others or by your own emotional reactions. These principles are powerful individually, but their true magic emerges when they flow together seamlessly. Let's see what this looks like in practice. Maria sat across from the potential client, aware of the stakes. Her company needed this contract, and the client knew it. "Your proposal is significantly higher than your competitors," the client said bluntly. "We need you to cut your price by 30% to move forward." 6 months earlier, Maria might have immediately defended her pricing, or reluctantly agreed to negotiate. But today, she took a different approach. She paused thoughtfully, allowing a brief silence to hang in the air. Rather than rushing to fill it, she maintained comfortable eye contact. "I understand value is essential in this decision," she said finally. Speaking at a measured pace, she didn't race to justify her pricing or immediately concede. Instead, she redirected, "Help me understand which specific aspects of the project are most critical to your success." With this question, she shifted the frame from price to value, from cost to outcomes. For the next 20 minutes, she mostly listened as the client described their goals, challenges, and priorities. When objections arose, she didn't meet them head-on but acknowledged and redirected. That's an important consideration. How would that factor into your definition of success for this project? By the meeting's end, they weren't discussing a 30% price cut anymore. Instead, they were exploring how to structure the engagement to deliver maximum value on the priorities that mattered most. Maria had transformed a pricing negotiation into a collaborative discussion about creating optimal outcomes. She never argued, never seemed defensive, and never lost her composure. Instead, she conducted the conversation with the skill of a symphony director, guiding rather than forcing its direction. Now that you've seen these principles in action, you might be wondering how to make them your own. The journey to conversational mastery follows a predictable path. First comes awareness. You begin noticing the hidden dynamics in conversations. Who controls the frame? Who reacts versus responds? who leads versus follows. Next comes deliberate practice. You consciously apply these techniques in low-stakes situations, gradually building your comfort with strategic silence, intentional framing, and conversational leadership. Finally comes integration, where these principles become so embedded in how you communicate that they feel like second nature. This progression transforms conversational power from something you occasionally remember to use into an integral part of how you engage with the world. As you practice and integrate these principles into your daily interactions, you'll discover they offer far more than just tactical advantages. Remember, 1. The frame determines everything. Control how the conversation is defined, and you control its outcome. 2. Strategic silence creates space. Your comfort with pauses gives you time to respond thoughtfully while often prompting others to reveal more. 3. Questions shape direction. Well-crafted questions guide conversations more effectively than statements. 4. Lead, don't compete. True mastery comes from conducting conversations, not winning arguments. 5. Redirect, don't resist. Move discussions in productive directions by guiding rather than opposing their momentum. These principles aren't just techniques. They're a new lens through which to view every human interaction. They transform you from a passive participant in conversations to an active architect of them. The hidden battle in every conversation will still be there, but now you'll be prepared to win it.